Alrighty, we're doing something a little different this morning. Leah and I are going to share the space and encouraging, casting vision, reflecting. And I was going to start and where did my notes go? Hold on a sec. Yeah, there we go. As Leah mentioned in the email this week, we have now gotten the permission to start gathering at Washington Elementary, which we were planning for our first gathering to be May 3rd. And we're still in the planning phases, and we'll have more information and details out to you soon. But as we start looking ahead, we want to take today and the Sundays leading up to May 23rd to talk about and help us do this transition to in-person gatherings. And so today we'd like to share a bit of the vision going forward. Last March, when we were thrown into lockdown, Leah and Jason scrambled and got our gathering online in just a few days. I don't know how they did it, but they did. And there is so much that has changed in this last year that in some aspects, it feels overwhelming to begin planning in person. I want to state that we are not at the same place we were last March. So when we open up, we can't just pick up where we left off at. As much as the transition to online was abrupt, we would like to make the transition back to in-person, hopefully smoother. We want to hold everyone's thoughts and concerns with care, and we will spend the next week talking about some of those expectations. But I wanted to think back a little bit. As we look back at 2020, it's easy to look at the COVID year and make a list of all the things that were lost during that year. If you were to sum up the COVID year in one word, what would that be? Hopefully it's not all lost. And I wanted us to take time this morning to kind of reframe that. Because what if 2020 wasn't a lost year, but was a year that was birthing something new? Okay, now I know that might feel like a stretch because we don't feel like something new is being birthed, but maybe we're in that part of that journey that is still the gestation, or for some of us like myself, that part of the child's birthing process that is so painful. What was it, 18 months? I looked up the longest gestation for a mammal as an elephant, and it's like 2 years. Not that I'm saying what we're going to be birthing will take this long, but to know that that process and that journey of birthing is long, it's hard. We don't always see the results. We don't always know what to expect. If you could think about, if you're a parent and you think about that expectant months or even maybe years or whatever before that child, it's all these emotions of ups and downs and hopes and dreams and failures, and even when that child is born. I was hanging out with some parents this week, and we're like, we feel like we're screwing our kids up, and sometimes that's what it just feels like, and not that it feels like we're screwing up Haven at all, but that journey that we're growing and processing, it's not always easy. And so I just wanted to take us to think of maybe 2020 is that place of birthing as opposed to a place of death. A couple weeks ago, I was in a Zoom space with Dr. Shanika Walker-Barnes, and she gave this statement. She said, maybe the darkness is the darkness of the womb and not the darkness of the tomb. And she, of anybody, probably could have had right to feel like the darkness that she was experiencing was the darkness of the tomb, because she wrote a prayer that was published in a book that came out in March that got a lot of negative publicity and misquoted and taken out of context. And so she's had a lot of negative press towards her. But to see her grace and her beauty amidst that, to know that maybe what might be in birth, might be in the darkness, is the womb and not the tomb. I just thought that was a beautiful image. So we have spent a lot of 2020 thinking of all the things we have lost, but if we flip that narrative and start naming the things that are birthed, maybe that could shift something within us. And I use that image because it helped me shift something within myself. To be honest, it's the last few months has been really hard leading Haven. For Leah and I, we just kind of like felt at the end of our ropes, and to think of a new vision going forward of something being birthed kind of stirred something within both of us, excitement, and hope for what we have planned. And then to hear that we can start meeting in person, just kind of fueled that excitement. And so I just encourage us to think of what it might mean to build something new. A couple weeks ago, I shared with you all a little of my journey, and how it's been going for me, that the year 2020 of searching for answers by doing all sorts of things in cohorts and all sorts of stuff. And sometimes I feel like I'm pretty much still in the middle of this journey, lots of pain and sifting through things. But in the midst of this, I kind of feel, or I kind of see this hope of the work that I have to do is smashing some of those idols that Leah once preached about in 2019, those idols of white patriarchy. And that is so ingrained in my background of growing up. And something that inspires me is the thought that, I don't know, greatest act of resistance is to be able to create a community that is anything but all those: white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, all those things. And to lean into those things. And maybe this is a call for Leah and I mostly, that Leah as a woman pastor and me as a woman pastor of person of color, that we have the opportunity to create something that is so unique, so beautiful. And I know that we've been trying to do that. And so I just keep calling us to that. And I just want us to hear that. It's not saying that we're going to create something new and throwing everything out that we've already had, but it means to revisit our values and to live into those values and to think about those values. We have the Venn diagram that we have placed our values on, the Jesus-centered, safe, and diverse. And if you've ever been through the, I don't know, the Haven 101 or whatever it's called class that you go to, that's something that is laid out. And so if you haven't gone through that, just to know that this is something that we have kind of based what Haven is: safe, Jesus-centered, and diverse. And there's lots of different places and organizations that can fit some of these. And we as Haven want to strive to be all of those things. But the hard part of that is that it takes work. It takes a lot of work. I will tell Leah often, just because we put it on our website doesn't mean we are safe and diverse or Jesus-centered. It's something that we have to work at. And so I'm going to call us into that in the next few months, maybe through the end of the year, of re-examining what does safe look like? Because safe for me might look different for safe for you. And safe, I just want this place to feel safe for everyone. And what that means for each of us. That might mean for each of us stepping back and making space for others. That might mean for us to be willing to risk and trust others with ourselves. It might mean trusting others with ourselves. It's a lot of work. And then the diverse piece, same thing. We can't just label us being diverse without doing the work and without recognizing how we are diverse and providing space for those who are marginalized, and to lift those pieces of diversity up and to recognize those. And we want to do a better job at that in our Sunday gatherings and in the life of our community. I lost my notes again. I'm going to go back. Here we go. So as we begin, so being in community and doing this well will take work. It will take all of us showing up with our truest self, willing to see those around us and the divinity in each one of us. So I believe God is birthing something in all of us and as a community. And I don't just say that as a woohoo rallying cry. But I say that from a deep conviction and a belief that God is in the business of resurrection or reconciliation or redemption. God is making all things new. Um, I think what John and Kim shared and reiterating Katie's sermons, it's like, wow, we could just drop the mic and be done with church, because that's the prophetic hope. That's the prophetic imagination that we as community desire to live into. And so with that, Leah's going to share some of those spaces that we can see God being present with us.
Thanks, Jeannie. So yeah, I just wanted to take some time. I mean, Jeannie and I both have kind of been reflecting back a bit. I think sometimes as we think about, I'll just recognize it's been really hard to feel a lot of vision this year. That's something I've really struggled with. But starting to feel it again, and also finding some of that by looking backwards at where we have felt connected in the past, and perhaps how some of those things are still carrying us through even when we haven't seen it. So I'm just going to review a few things. In the fall of 2019, a group of about 40 of us gathered in Sonoma for our annual Haven retreat. It was a time of culmination in what had felt like a particularly significant season for Haven. The summer, I had preached through our Smashing Idols series as new folks like the Wongs and Chris and Deborah and others started regularly attending Haven. We had record participation, and I'll share a few images. Brent can help me share a few images here. Our entry in the Oakland Pride Parade. I think we have a couple images of that. That was in September of 2019. Yeah, that was our group that was part of Oakland Pride. I think we maybe have one more from that. Mm-hmm. And then the next week, we had our QT Haven group who led our participation in the parade. And then the next week, they also led our first Haven Pride service. It's just one glimpse. It was a packed house as we had our first Haven Pride service. It was an exciting time that fall. Felt like the culmination of years of hard work. In fact, that fall, we were marking 5 years since the first small group had met in Jason and I's first living room in Berkeley, just a few months after we moved here. And to mark the anniversary, my mentor and senior pastor, A.D. Wassink, joined us at the Haven Retreat as our guest speaker. We can share a couple pictures of that retreat. There's a campfire. And there's a picture, I think, of our whole group. Yeah, we planned this ceremony for the last morning of, this is an image from, it was a service where my ordination would be officially transferred from Iowa City Church to the church that now existed in Berkeley, Haven. It was a time rich with possibility and promise. The ordination ceremony was particularly powerful, not just for myself, but for all of us who attended. As AD said to me afterwards, it felt like your whole church was being ordained. And she was right. Looking back, none of us had any idea in this October of 2019 what a turn things would take less than 6 months later. Now, that fall in 2019, our community was having a conversation about the kind of community we wanted to become, what we were creating together. We called that series the home we're building together. And one of the most significant experiences at the retreat consisted of this sacred brainstorming activity. You can just go back to the first one for now. And in this activity, we invited the Spirit to speak while we imagined together the kind of spiritual home we wanted to become. All of us there were invited to write ideas that felt like they might just be inspired and put them on this floor plan of our imagined home. So the next week after the retreat, I actually responded to the events of that gathering by reading like a pastoral letter that I had written to the congregation rather than a formal sermon. And in that letter, I described some of what we experienced in our time of sacred imagining together. And I just want to remind you that by reading some of those words. Honestly, when I invited you into this exercise, Haven, I said, I had no idea what to expect the outcome would be. We started with this picture of an empty house. We were each invited to take some time to listen to the Holy Spirit and consider what we might fill that house with. How would we describe the foundations of Haven? What has been built thus far? How might we name what we believe needs to be built going forward? Each of us took some time to listen and were then invited to share our ideas by putting them on the house. I myself took a walk during that time. I asked Jesus what I was meant to receive, what I believed was needed in this home that's being built. And one of the words I thought I sensed most clearly was trust. I had a sense that had more than one meaning. It certainly meant we needed to create a space that felt safe for relational trust to be built between folks, that people felt that they could open themselves up to be known and trust that others would receive them with authentic care. But I also felt like there was another layer of trust that God was inviting us into, or at least me into, to trust that this community can hear from the divine and be used to speak God's wisdom to one another, to trust that Jesus could be present in our midst and revealed through one another's gifts. For me, this meant letting go of the pressure I can feel as a pastor to always be the one on the scent of the Spirit, directing which way we're supposed to go. It meant trusting that others had important words for all of us to hear, and that what was needed in this season was space for those words to be spoken. And then I came inside and saw with my own eyes the ways that your capacity to hear from God was being embodied in the present. And now you can go ahead and show the next image. My own call to trust you was validated as I came in the room and saw the wondrous picture emerging. Our empty house had been filled with dreams for the future, dreams for the ways we'd move more deeply into relationship with one another, finding the comfort and solace that home is meant to offer. Dreams of the partnerships we'd forge with our neighbors, the ways we'd bless the community around us, dreams of more marginalized voices preaching, leading worship, and shaping our community at every level, dreams for our kids and youth, that they too would have a spiritual home to nurture their own growth and connection with adults that can care for them as they evolve. Dreams for a healing center, for a worship collective, for places where creativity flows and new music and art that reflect a more expansive view of the divine are birthed. Dreams for our own building to live all this out in, and even dreams that building would have a train station and a heliport. As Connie had said after observing it, Haven's not building a house, we're building a resort. Seeing this house now filled with ideas brought tears to my eyes to behold, knowing each colorful note represented a word of hope or faith or longing for what this spiritual home might become. My own focus turned from my personal building projects to behold the bigger home was being revealed in our midst. And as we read through each contribution to our dream house, I saw the common dreams that were being cultivated, the common building blocks that were being set side by side. I also saw words I never could have imagined, but that seemed to speak on behalf of the divine. I felt a sense of awe for what was being co-created. And all this time, after all this foundational labor, now something special is being formed that is beyond any of us, but all of us are a part of it. Those were the words I wrote to you in 2019, Haven. You can take the image down. Our sacred envisioning didn't end with Post-it notes on a piece of poster board. In the weeks and months that followed, our leadership team sorted through all those words and ideas to try to identify the common themes and consider what a vision for the year to come might look like. So interestingly, the Envisioning Haven team who spearheaded the work and the Haven board who affirmed it didn't focus on a series of tasks. Rather, we identified a set of like shared priorities, what we called areas of alignment that might inform the things we felt called to do. And so we spent the first quarter of 2020, all before the shutdowns, refining these areas of alignment, imagining that they would be our roadmap as we went about the tasks of growing as a community and kind of building the house. And so even when mid-March came with its first shelter in place orders, we continued with our plan to finalize and share these areas of alignment with the broader community. And in fact, a year ago, this week, April 19th, 2020, we shared the following areas of alignment with you. These are the slides we shared a year ago exactly. We'll go ahead and share the area of alignment. Number one, there are 4 of them: relational community. And for each of those, we kind of gave a little bit like how this might be expressed, but the goal was the priority: relational community. Increase relational investment that folks in the community have for one another. Bring more folks in the community into the work of nurturing relationships, so relationships are more networked with one another. Leah doesn't serve as the central hub to which all are connected. Then there was powerful and relevant spiritual connection. And we said that might look like nurturing connection to the divine through thoughtful teaching and powerful and relevant spiritual practices, musical, liturgical, charismatic, that reflect our evolving reconstruction of Jesus-centered faith. We talked about broadening Haven's reach, our 3rd area of alignment. Pursuing perhaps strategic partnerships and coalitions, as well as opportunities to demonstrate our mission and values in the public square, increasing our visibility, enabling us to practically live out the implications of our faith. And finally, our 4th area of alignment we articulated was justice lens in all pursuits. To work with a diverse collective of leaders in the Haven community to continually examine the ways our efforts as a community of faith can support greater justice, inclusion, and equity, particularly for marginalized folks in our community and the communities we partner with and serve. Now, when I presented these priorities a year ago, I imagined I was presenting something that was being, kind of challenged at present, but I expected we'd soon emerge from pandemic virtual church and we would like regain steam in our building projects. But then the emergence never came. The special meetings I thought we would plan to, kind of put together some of these new initiatives, that just felt like too much of a burden to ask folks to do over Zoom. In fact, as the weeks of virtual church went on, even our Sundays were becoming more sparsely attended. Many of the leaders who had helped craft these areas of alignment were not even attending the Haven Sundays regularly. So what did it mean to keep this vision alive? Was this actually the vision for this season after all? Or had we completely missed something? This didn't feel like a home building season anymore. It felt more like exile, a time when the community of God was stripped from their home, their temple destroyed. And so without really doing it intentionally, we put this vision aside. I felt my own capacity to see God's presence and a way forward diminished. Pastoring in the pandemic feels to me like pastoring in a fog, I told other leaders. I can't see where we're going. I can't even see who's still with us. I don't think we'll be really able to see those things until the fog lifts. Many months later, I finally have a sense of perhaps the fog beginning to lift. My kids are back in school, which means for the first time in a year, I actually can have coherent thought on a regular basis. That's huge. We're slowly, carefully having the opportunities to start meeting with folks in person again. We now have a date to begin gathering on Sundays at Washington Elementary again. All of those things are part of this fog lifting, I think. Or perhaps, as Jeanne has said, If you think of a season of gestation, perhaps we are coming close to those places where things can be birthed, where you become, where a parent who is gestating becomes more aware of what is happening inside of them. Where in the early months, they just can't discern it. As I begin to look ahead with Jeannie and all of you at where we are now, where we go from here, I think it is interesting to look back at those areas we identified over a year ago as core to what we wanted Haven to be, all derived from that home building project. And what I find helpful to notice and also hopeful is actually how those words still resonate a year later, after everything we've been through. The truth is, none of us had the 2020 any of us imagined we would have. But even so, those areas of alignment have held. They've even been embodied in places, though certainly not in the ways we initially thought they would be. Honestly, let's look at them one more time. And you have that list, Brent, of just all 4 of them. I've seen people find new creative ways to show up for each other this year that have shown a value for relational community. I'm going to share a couple ideas. Jeannie, if you want to kick in any, feel free. We've seen people writing letters to each other, doing the Pen Pal project, meeting up for masked walks, backyard hangouts, showing up and bringing each other goodies or groceries as needed. Folks have showed up for Zoom game nights, had virtual birthday parties. Jeannie, do you have any what you want to add?
My favorite, the writing group.
The writing group.
Just doing something creative with each other was amazing.
Cookie decorating, that was fun. I think about all our documentary discussions we had earlier in this season and the book discussions we've been having lately.
Mm-hmm.
Even just the way folks are showing up, all of you who are, week after week, even though it's not, we all know it's not the same, and engaging in these breakout rooms, being here for each other. That is relational community. I think about that second value, powerful and relevant spiritual connection. I've been thinking about some of the places I've seen that this year. I remember we did that season, that exploration of lament last summer, and how deeply folks brought of themselves to engage in lament, to do that together. That was a powerful and relevant way to connect in our spirits. I've seen it in the Thursday night prayer gatherings I've gotten to be a part of. I've seen it in the ways that we've tried to make space for all of the things that have happened this year in our services, trying to liturgically reflect together on the pandemic, these struggles for racial justice, the election, the Capitol riots, the inauguration, so much. Any you want to add, Jeannie?
I was just always amazed how, it's in scripture, it says where 2 or more are gathered. And even if we're gathered virtually, that God's presence is still known and felt and experienced. And so, it's what is being birthed, that God can be experienced even through a Zoom experience. So I saw someone put faith in action. That's another word.
Amen. Yeah, and feel free, if you have other places where you've seen these, go ahead and put them in the chat. I think about the ways that folks led things out in Lent when Jeannie and I were just depleted and we did not have vision for how to bring creative spiritual experiences in Lent, and y'all stepped up and brought us some such beautiful experiences, such powerful things, both in our service and for folks to explore outside of Sundays. I think this, the having virtual church has meant that even though we didn't put any concerted effort into it, in some ways, we have broadened Haven's reach. It was not what we were thinking about. But we'll also say, hey, there are folks here who weren't a part of Haven before this season. And there are folks who are tuning in on YouTube that we still haven't maybe met yet, and have been throughout the service, throughout this season. And we may never know, exactly where those ways that we are sharing go. And so thank you to all of you who've been a part of sharing what Haven has been in this season, even when it's been challenging to think about what it means to broaden our reach, to be more available to folks. And finally, looking at this justice lens, I think, like we mentioned, those documentary discussions, many of our readings for book discussions, lots of the sermon topics that have been led this year, decisions about resources that we've given away in the last year to bless the community around us. The campaign we supported did a special offering in support of Disability Justice Culture Club, giving towards the Way in Berkeley, the Black church that suffered a hate crime this summer. Other places where it felt like we were having conversations and trying to make decisions that reflected our desire to live into more justice. And of course, our Faith in Action group, which that's been a core emphasis. Anything else, Jeanne, you'd put in for any of these?
No, I think those are spoken ones. There's probably so many unspoken acts that y'all have done that we don't know about. The relationships and communication that you've kept up with people. So we really appreciate the effort that you guys are doing that we don't even know about.
And so that's kind of where we want to end, is reviewing all that and considering what is it that has been gestating this year. Perhaps the fact that all of this had kind of come into being, into our community, right in before this season of that has felt like so much loss, but perhaps has been a gestation, or you might think of it as a chrysalis time, right? That time where the caterpillar has all that has been formed in them, but now needs to go into the chrysalis in order to emerge. That the DNA that must be something needs to happen to it in that dark place before it can fully live in. I can't help but wonder if perhaps that is some of what the Spirit has been doing in us this year. Planting these things, putting them in our DNA, fomenting them, germinating them, even when we're not thinking about it, even when we have not been speaking this vision. We have not. We presented it and then we kind of let it fall apart. And yet, these things have been happening in their quiet way. They've been continuing to kind of hold true in our community. How much more might we experience of these things coming to life? How much more might we find ourselves living into them, and to so much more when we move, if we can move into a season where we do speak the vision again with more frequency, more hope, more joy, inviting the Spirit to continually call us forward and making them a reality. That's the kind of the journey that Jeanne and I want to invite our whole community into, in envisioning together where we go from here, allowing some of these things to remind us of who we've been, who we felt called to be, and help us imagine together what that means in the months and years to come. So I think with that, Jeannie, do you have anything else you want to add before we move it to breakout groups?
No, I don't think so. Thank you for sharing, Leah. That was helpful.
Yeah, thank you for starting us off with some vision. So we're going to spend the next couple weeks kind of talking more about like expectations for what our Sundays will look like and other things. But we just kind of wanted to start with this envisioning conversation to frame everything. And we're just going to give you a couple breakout groups questions to consider. And then we'll send you off for 15 minutes. So what areas of the Haven vision that Jeannie and Leah shared resonate with you? Were there parts that if you hadn't heard any of this before, you're kind of like, wow, that connects? Or how have you seen these areas of alignment lived out this year? Or places where it's felt challenging to live them out, being able to discern that as well. So that's kind of the conversation we're going to have for the next 15 minutes. And then we'll come back for worship.